There's something interesting that happens with regards to wine with honey, right, Dr. Roth? How does that play out?
Okay, so the root of it is in the Bible, where it says that the sacrificial offerings cannot include honey or yeast, called dvash v'chol seor. And we find in sources that begin in Muslim Spain, especially in the Rambam, who did most of his work in Egypt, but he originated in Spain. And he says, in the land of the West, which for him means North Africa and Spain, they have this thing where if they want to keep their wine kosher, they add a little bit of honey to it. So he writes that in his responsa, and he also writes it in Mishnah Torah. But here an interesting thing happens, that there are a couple of people who were active in southern France in the 12th century. I'm sorry, beginning of the 13th century. They were both students of someone called Shlomo Minahar, Rabbi Shlomo of Montpellier, who himself led opposition to the Rambam, but not on halachic grounds, mostly on philosophical grounds. They were upset by his philosophical approach to Judaism. So following Shlomo Minahar were two people. One was Rabbi Yonah ben Avraham of Girona, known as Rabbeinu Yonah, and the other was his friend David ben Shaul. Now, David ben Shaul is almost unknown outside of that incident with the Maimonidean controversy. But a few years ago, I came across a text that had been mentioned here and there in scholarship. It's found in the manuscript, and it's a whole text by David ben Shaul about the laws of wine. And among other things, he tells a story there. He says, when I was a child, this is probably in Narbonne in southern France, a group of Jewish merchants came from Spain, and they bought several barrels of wine from my parents, and I watched them. And as they were closing up the barrels of wine to take them all the way back to Spain, I saw that they added a little bit of honey to each barrel. And I asked them, why are you doing this? And they said, well, if you put this honey in, then it'll remain kosher. I was like, what?
It'll not be subject to gentile touch,
exactly.
Rendering it somehow unfit for Jewish consumption.
That's right. So he ran back to his teacher, who's probably this same Shlomo Minahar, and he said, where does this come from? I've never heard of such an idea that honey would protect the wine from gentile touch. And so Shlomo Minahar said, it's true, the Rambam says it, but we don't do that here. So David ben Shaul says that he's against it. And he says this teacher was against it. And in fact, Rabbeinu Yonah was also against it. And because of Rabbeinu Yonah, Rabbeinu Yonah was a first cousin of the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. So between the two of them, Rabbeinu Yonah and Ramban were incredibly influential in northern Spain, in the area of Catalonia. And so all the people who came afterwards, like the Rashba and the Ritva, they were all students of Rabbeinu Yonah and Ramban. And so all of those people ruled against that position of the Rambam. And so when the Kesef Mishnah quotes it in his commentary on the Rambam, he has this long list of like 7 rabbis who are against it. Rabbeinu Yonah, Ramban, Rashba, Rosh, Ran, Rivash, Rashbatz. So they're all against it. And that way, he basically just cut it off. And nobody followed the Rambam after that, even though it was, a legitimate halachic position. And in fact, in other areas like France and Germany, people were happy to adopt that opinion. I don't know whether they did it in practice, but they quoted the Rambam and they didn't have any problem with it. But because these people in Spain, who were influenced indirectly by Shlomo Minahar, they were opposed to it, so it kind of disappeared off the books, and I'm not aware of anybody today who considers that a viable opinion.
An interesting afterlife of that sort of conflict, that area of conflict.
Yeah, I think it's there aren't that many examples I can think of where an opinion of the Rambam is just like completely blown out of the water.
So it sounds like it was kept alive, at least in Franco-Germany, around the area of the Tosafos.
So like I said, I'm not sure. They mention it, but they don't like say that they're doing it. They just say the Rambam said that. It's like an interesting idea.
Interesting. Okay. But certainly in our Provence and Languedoc, they did not. This is something they specifically
they
disagreed
did not
with.
do that. Right.
Okay.
That's what they didn't do.
Yeah.